Which I've really been looking forward to. As we normally do on Voices from the Village, we went out in the street and we asked some of the people in Santa Cruz what they thought about the church's engagement on homeless issues and what part the city might play in that, and how much there is a participation between the two entities, the city and the faith communities, in providing for our less fortunate. So let's see what they had to say.
Even that would work. For the women especially, it's not safe out here. Not at all. More food, I don't know. Food's good, actually. They are trying, but, you know, we need help. Showers. You know, more showers and bathroom facilities and, you know, safer place for women to hang out.
Oh, I wouldn't have a clue, love. Maybe work. Maybe give them some work. Give them some rubber gloves and a bucket or something like that. You know, just, yeah, give them something to do so they feel that they're worth something, and then pay them, and then they can find somewhere to sleep.
Food, shelter, water, employment, and free weed.
For the homeless youth, just making sure that they have school supplies, that they are able to get to school on time, that they have stability, and being able to get where they need to be so that they can learn.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Are you a teacher?
I am a teacher.
Well, the church should provide some food at least once a day. I would say either supper or lunch, a big soup or salad and rice. That's the first thing they should provide. Then they should provide some kind of clothing options. So in other words, if people need some shoes, I have a big box of shoes, a big box of sweaters, and someone can, you can take what you need. Because that's what love means, receiving what's necessary and giving what's needed.
Oh, well, housing first. They're homeless, so they need homes. I think they should drop everything, all the other programs, and turn them into housing. That is number one, and they shouldn't worry about sobriety and all this other stuff. They should worry about case management and getting people into homes and keeping them there.
That's what people had to say today in Santa Cruz. Back to you in the studio.
So as you can see from the Voices segment from the street, people seem to know a lot about homelessness, about the faith community, about what they feel that the city government should be doing, and I think that's one of the great conundrums, that we struggle with day to day, is figuring out, how that partnership is going to work out, how that coalition is going to work out. Let's let the viewers get to know each one of you just a little bit. Joel, tell us just a little bit about yourself and your ministry and how you became engaged kind of in social justice issues.
Well, I'm Father Joel Miller from Calvary Episcopal Church, and I've been there going on 8 years. So time goes quickly. And before that, I was in the Central Valley, Stockton and Modesto. But it's been a great place to live and be and build a community. But coming here really addressing homelessness and the social issues around homelessness was not something that I had on my agenda, but something that became evident need because they're all around our church.
Yeah, of
I
course.
think it's kind of, everyone knows that. And so, you know, we did have a food pantry, and the food pantry had been going on for 35 years by 2 parishioners, basically, who had been doing it for 35 years. And they were transitioning out, and it was time for them to pass the baton on to somebody else.
Right.
But at the same time, there was an interest in the outreach ministry growing. It really was not my first initiative. It was really coming from the parish. And it seemed like a logical connection because every Sunday we announced the words of Christ that we're to love our neighbors as ourselves. So it seemed like this is an obvious thing for a church to do.
Okay, and we thank you. We know that you're going on vacation to Sweden tomorrow. You're in the midst of packing. You're going to be going at 4 o'clock in the morning, so thank you so much for joining us for this discussion and lending your voice to it. Darrell, Yeaney, really welcome. It's the first time we've had an opportunity to kind of get together and discuss important issues. Your work with the Progressive Christian Forum. Tell us a little bit about your background and kind of, you know, what you do with that forum.
Okay. I'm a retired now Presbyterian pastor associated locally with the Trinity Presbyterian Church as a parish associate, which means I work for free.
As does our good friend Paul Sieber. We have to mention Paul, of course.
Right, right. Most of my career has been in university ministry, sometimes known as campus ministry or chaplaincy. And I spent 14 years here at the University of California, Santa Cruz, doing that back in the late mid-70s, I guess, and early 80s. And in fact, most of my career has been in that area, in Kansas, here in California, in Iowa for another 10 years or so. Now retired back here because we have children and grandchildren.
Ah, okay.
But Paul Siever and I went down to a gathering in Southern California, a weekend gathering of a group called the Jesus Seminar. It's a popular name, put out by the Westar Institute, an international group of biblical scholars who do weekend seminars for interested laity and clergy, mostly at churches. We attended that I think it was in Santa Rosa, no, it was in Santa Rosa, in Southern California. And we're very interested in the stimulation that it brought and decided we could do it here. So when we got back, we contacted Westar, asked them if they could do a seminar, and they did. And so 4 years ago, we had our first Progressive Christian Forum, and these 2 gentlemen were both a part of that at that time. And we have continued then annual gatherings under the aegis of our local Santa Cruz Progressive Christian Forum since then. And the year after, the first year, we had Tom, well, the name is departing my mind.
Of course, but it'll come back to you after the show, so we won't worry about it now.
Anyway, a scholar from Stanford
and
another one from Oklahoma here. And then we had Ched Myers and his wife, Louise Ennis, here for a week following that. And then Robin Myers from Oklahoma City. And we'd like to talk about that as we go along, of course, And then last February, our 4th gathering was with Diana Butler Bass from the East Coast, talking about the trends in church and society today that are rapidly changing and where the church can fit in with that. So we're in planning now for our 5th event, which will be next February, and probably be held again at the Congregational Church on High Street.
Well, wonderful having you here, and look forward to your thoughts about the church and its involvement in the social justice issues. Pastor Steve DeFields-Gambrel, welcome. Disciples of Christ, the Circle Church, you've done wonderful work for many years. Give us some of your background and you know, kind of your engagement on the social justice issues.
Well, I started out my life for 15 years working as an addictions treatment counselor and left that to go into ministry, and 11 years ago found myself in Santa Cruz. Kind of like Joel, with absolutely no intention of sort of finding homeless ministry as a big part of my work, but there were folks in the neighborhood, there were folks at the church, and it rather got thrust upon us through a couple of dramatic events, and we realized that this is our call. And so we've done a lot at the Circle Church with homeless ministries, and that's grown into quite a vision of the idea that we're no longer going to sit around and wait for people to come to us on Sunday mornings.
Right.
We're going to take what Jesus called the kingdom of God and what Martin Luther King Jr. called the beloved community out into the community and be that in the world. And it no longer matters that much to me whether people show up in worship on Sunday morning at 11 o'clock. What matters to me is whether we're being that people in the world.
And I know that I'm at the Circle Church, the Red Church, Calvary Episcopal, every Monday night for their meal and enjoy Joel's
Grateful for
sermons,
that.
Talking about community, talking about the gathering, those kinds of things, and hopefully we'll be able to kind of talk more about that. Let me remind you before we start into a more in-depth conversation that this is a live call-in show, so you can call 425-8844. 425-8844. We've got a gizmo right here in front of me, and you can ask any one of our guests a question that you might be interested in getting the answer to. Darrell, you suggested when I did an outline for the show that we might begin the conversation talking about the origins of the faith community engagement on social issues with a brief historical sketch of at least the American experience, including more conservative faith communities and more liberal or progressive ones. Why don't you start us out just to, your thoughts about that idea, that concept?
Sure. It's a huge subject, but I think we can probably all agree that at least in substance, all of the efforts of the Protestant Church and the Catholic Church in this country and around the world have really had their origins in the biblical texts, both the Old Testament and New Testament, which are very explicit about the call for social justice in the world. The Old Testament prophets were the primary spokespersons for that, and I'm sure we all know Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Isaiah, Amos.
Well,
so
I don't
forth.
know it as well as Joel would like me to know it, frankly. But nevertheless, go ahead.
In any case, well, we all know those quotes, let justice roll down like waters, righteousness like a mighty stream. That's the Old Testament prophet speaking. And they were speaking to the world of their day and calling for social justice at that time. There was a lot of corruption then, as there is today, a lot of abuse of the poor and so forth, and they were calling for the religious community to engage itself in justice and righteousness then. Jesus, of course, comes right out of that tradition, and he's our guide. And Jesus spoke the same kind of message, both to his followers and to the crowds who followed him. And he also, in some very direct ways, challenged the establishment of his time on the law, which was, at that time, the religious leaders were colleagues with the political leaders of Rome. And he challenged that, and because of his, my judgment, because of his challenge of his own culture and political establishment, he ended up as a martyr, as we all know. And it's his life and his challenge, his resurrection, that has inspired the Christian community ever since. And I think it's safe to say, too, that the early Christian community, for perhaps 3-4 centuries, was deeply committed to social justice, social action, helping the poor, and indeed resisting violence, for example. There were no Christians, for example, who were willing to serve in the military for the first several centuries of this era. That all came out of that Christian teaching for social justice and engagement with society. And of course, you come to our own time in America, we have the witness of the from the beginning of the country clear up to the present. The church is engaged in various social issues along the way, including recently probably the civil rights movement in our country, where probably all of us were deeply engaged in calling for justice. So there are lots of history there.
Joel, your observations about this historical context of the engagement in social justice issues by the faith community?
Yeah, it was a great summary. Thank you for that. But I would think that one thing also to add is Benedict, who is kind of the founder of the monastic movement. There were monastic movements, the Desert Fathers. And as I was thinking about the question, there's been different ways Christians have responded. Some have responded through charity, just providing food and clothing, and that goes back to the words of Jesus. Where were you when I was hungry? Where were you when I was naked? Where were you when I was in prison? So there are those charity ministries. But Benedict was also very concerned about chaos, disorder, corruption in Rome, particularly in the 6th century. And his model was more to form a community that kind of modeled how people should relate to one another.
As you often say,
that's my big word. That's my big word, community. Yeah. And I don't think it's the sole solution, but I don't think charity is the sole solution, nor do I think political action is the sole solution. It's some combination of all those
holistic approach,
three things.
to that, of course.
And when you do the political action, you're more likely to be a martyr than when you kind of quietly try to build a community, or if you give a little bit of charity to people. But it's really all those things.
Yeah,
and
well, it doesn't bode well for someone like me who is a politician by trade and not necessarily a faith community member. So, well, we'll see what we can do. Your thoughts, Steve?
Well, I think an interesting part of that story, and we could talk all night about the story and trail of this theme in the Bible and in the history of Christianity, but one of the most interesting and ironic things is that in the very early part of the 20th century, the modern Pentecostal movement was born, and in its beginnings, it was very much a social gospel movement. They were racially integrated in the beginning of the 20th century, 60 years before Martin Luther King Jr. They were ordaining women to ministry. They were caring for the poor. They were the poor, and they were caring for each other. They were sharing everything they had. Many of them were socialists and even anarchists in that very powerful political foment of the early 20th century. Of course, nowadays, when you think about Pentecostal Christians in North America, you think about folks that are really much more on the Christian right and wouldn't have much to do with the social gospel movement. But that's not their own history in the beginning. And in Central and South America, they're still very much progressive and oriented toward a social gospel message. So there's even a social gospel thread in the most conservative branches of Christianity today that often gets overlooked.
It's interesting. One thing I really did want to touch upon, and that is the work of Robin Myers and Roy Bourgeois. You talked about women being ordained. And we had gone, I think, last year to Peace United, where they showed the film about the work that he had done and the women who were being ordained in, I don't know what denomination it was, but it was extremely interesting about the work that they had done. Give us your impressions kind of the work of Robin Myers and or Roy Bourgeois.
Well, I heard Robin Myers first when he came to Santa Cruz and read his book about evangelism, which is usually thought of as almost contrary to social justice. But for him, they're very much wedded together. And the thing that I think is amazing is that he can be in such a conservative part of the United States and have such a strong social justice theme in his parish and in his congregation. I think it's United Church of Christ.
United Church of Christ in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, nonetheless. That's true. And yes, I think Robin has done an extraordinary job. He's a scholar in many ways and a very progressive Christian. His book really deals with the historical Jesus and technically takes apart the gospel stories in a very scholarly way. But he has developed this congregation from a small congregation of maybe 120 members to now a congregation of nearly 800 in Oklahoma City. And I think a symbol of the organization that Robin has put together is that the church budget, the administrative budget of the church that pays his salary and fixes the holes in the roof and waters the grass, is completely separate from the mission budget, and the mission budget, which is outreach, is supported entirely separately by the people who are engaged in it.
Right.
So the people who are doing homeless ministry and are doing ministry with refugees and are doing ministry with the poor are paying their own way. in a ministry, and the church is just blossoming in under that kind of leadership. So that's what we learned from Robin Myers. I didn't know all of that before he came, but we've been discovering that since.
And your thoughts, Steve?
Well, I think the interesting thing about Robin Myers is that he is proving, both through the popularity of his books nationally and in Oklahoma City in particular, which is a very conservative place, that an unapologetic and clear and biblically bold ministry of social justice meets a need, a hunger that exists, and people are flocking to that church. You know, Diana Butler Bass this year at the Progressive Christian Forum talked about the fact that institutional Christianity is in decline. As a matter of fact, it's sort of, it's fallen off the cliff. The rapid decline of Christianity in the United States is dramatic, and yet you see these other examples which shows that contrary to what many people think, a social gospel version of Christianity strikes a nerve. People say, that's what I always thought Jesus was about, and they're ready to hear that. We've just been too shy to proclaim it.
And one thing that strikes me about the progressive nature of the faith communities and really engaging on social issues is that sometimes, and you've had it happen to you and Father Joel as well, the community at large is not necessarily as receptive to those efforts as they might be, and it takes a long period of time for them to actually accept the fact that you are working toward trying to help the community in ways, helping the less fortunate, helping the homeless, doing these things, and that is not only part of your ministry, but part of a social agenda that perhaps we all should be pursuing. I know, Joel, maybe you could talk briefly about your establishment of such a terrific homeless program through the Red Church and doing the shelters and doing the meals and things like that. And in previous years, there has been some pushback from the community in regard to your doing these programs.
Well, as you were talking, I was thinking, and the word safety came to mind. And at every point that there has been pushback, and some of it has been very public and very passionate too, the pushback not to have homeless ministries, social justice to the homeless, people raise the question of safety. And it's a difficult issue to confront, because as a church we also have a responsibility of providing safety for children, safety for the elderly, and when people are invited to become part of the community that are a perceived threat or danger, then there's going to be some conflict. And I think it's not dissimilar to the way the church has evolved with gay and lesbian issues, that they realize that they know somebody that's gay and they're not queer or a pervert or dangerous. They're a normal person like all of us. And so that's really been the thing that's helped, that even though our homeless ministry is quite separate from what happens on Sunday morning with the rest of the congregation, there are enough people that are homeless mixing with the congregation so they know that these are real people and not monsters or enemies.
And yet, interestingly, in past months, there's been kind of a rapprochement between, the Red Church and the Downtown Association, things like that. It's been very refreshing and I think very encouraging, as you might agree, that they're seeing this ministry, this social justice agenda for homelessness, the disadvantaged, the disabled, people in reduced circumstances, something that the community does want. Steve, let me skip over to you. And at the Circle Church, you have a tremendous program for the homeless and for the less fortunate. And yet, because you are in the circles, in a neighborhood that is arguably worried about public safety, as Joel pointed out, and you've had some pushback yourself. And how do you handle that? What has been your experience?
Well, I just got an email. I got 2 emails this week with videos of a young man, one video in the neighborhood and once at the church when none of us were at the church. And the statement was, "See what dangerous people you've brought into the neighborhood." I didn't recognize this person. So I talked to some of my homeless folks and I talked to all of our staff that do our different ministries. And I found out that this young man was born and raised on the Lower West Side. In fact, he's almost never taken advantage of any of the Circle Church services. He won't come near us at the church. But he's all around the neighborhood shooting up and causing trouble. But yet, the perception is that the Circle Church brought him into the neighborhood from some other state. And that's just not at all true. He's one of our kids. He was born and raised on the Lower West Side and still has family on the Lower West Side, and that's where he's at, and that's where he lives. And that would be true if the church didn't exist. So part of it's perception, because we give people space and respect and the dignity to walk around in the daylight at the Circle Church. People see that, and it scares them. What they don't see as clearly is, for example, that the crime rate has dropped in our neighborhood since we started doing these ministries. But they see all these folks at the church, and it frightens them. It legitimately frightens them. So what I try to do with that is to listen. I try to provide what information I can to help people understand what is real and what's myth. And then reassure folks that we're trying to be a part of the solution, and I think we are. But you know, that's not always an easy sell, because the bottom line is that in a biblical language, there's this world, and it operates on a very competitive, harsh, violent model of life. And there's the world we call the kingdom of God, that Jesus, as Jesus named it. And that's a different world. And ultimately, I live in a different world where I see reality different than some of my neighbors. And I don't know that there's always a way to bridge that gap.
Darrell, let me ask you this. Does the perceived, radical or progressive nature of this kind of ministry, does that make it more difficult to get mainstream acceptance for those programs and that kind of ministry, you think, generally speaking?
I don't think so. I think more and more the progressive churches are engaging pretty actively in outreach of all kinds. I was at the Trinity Church, the Presbyterian Church this morning, for example, and they had folks in who regularly take trips to El Salvador, taking water projects, purification projects, and health ministries to El Salvador. There are delegations that go from a number of our Santa Cruz churches every year, multiple actually in the course of a year. That seems to be widely accepted. And in fact, folks have been brought here. Now, neighborhood contacts may be a little more dangerous than going to El Salvador or bringing El Salvadorians here. So that's a point, I think, to take into account. There's another organization, Steve, that might be brought into the conversation, and that's a group called COPA. I think it's called the Community Organization for Public Action.
Communities
Relationship and
organizing for relational power.
There you go. You've got it much better than I do.
Difficult, but I know of them.
Yes, and most of our churches are represented in some way or another on that community organization. Now that's a step up in a certain sense of, in terms of political involvement for churches.
No question about it.
And many churches are hesitant to get very deeply involved in that. But that is more of a confrontational attempt to confront and to change societal structures so that people aren't hurt and we don't have to go in and repair and heal. But we start at the place where people are hurt. And that, I think, is more difficult for communities of faith to engage in these days. So that is a point I think we need to talk about more in our faith communities.
Well, let's move now from this kind of almost an abstract analytical discussion of the faith community social justice and talk a little bit about really what's happening in our community today. As Joel and Steve know, and I'm sure you as well, Darrell, 2 or 3 years ago we had kind of a homeless forum at the Calvary Episcopal Red Church, and we had city council members and various stakeholders engaging on the issue of how we're going to help our homeless community, our working poor, our people in reduced circumstances. And whilst there was quite a bit of talk and energy that was devoted to that particular meeting, really nothing happened until May of 2000, Joel helped me, 12 or 11 for the AFC. And some of us got together and formed the Association of Faith Communities, and Steve, member, and Joel and myself. And that was the beginning of a program of really substantive, I think, social justice programs for the homeless and for the disadvantaged. Joel, tell us a little bit about the AFC and how it's operating now.
Well, I think the principle of the AFC is not dissimilar to the principle of COPA, that a sole voice in a community has very little power. Even a single family has very little power. But you start linking people together, and then you create a network that has a real force or power in a community. So, the AFC wouldn't be of any effect unless people like yourself, Mel Nunez, Father Joe Okito, and all the other churches. We have, I think, 15 churches that are members of the AFC. So that gives us a lot of power when Pat Lorenzo from Resurrection Church goes out to raise money to collect socks and distribute them with the homeless. And since our inception, she's distributed 12,000 pairs.
12,000 pairs of socks.
And I know I couldn't have done that alone. And I think Pat would say the same thing. And it started out very small with the shelter just at our church one night a week. And now it's at 6 different churches, 7 nights a week. And lots of churches have feeding programs and other ministries. The Santa Cruz Revival, Ron Scadina, he has a meal, and he's a member of AFC.
And of course, Darrell, Trinity Presbyterian, is the Wednesday night shelter. So it's part of the member of the AFC in building that kind of community. And certainly the AFC and all of its members and all the people who are benefited by that appreciate the engagement of the Trinity Presbyterian congregation of Vestry.
Yeah, they're very much committed, and it is, I'm not sure everyone quite knows that it's more than a feeding program. That is to say, folks come to eat, but they also come to stay overnight to find a safe place and a dry place, often in the winter, although it's not in the summer, but a safe place and a comfortable place to stay overnight. So we have, and there are how many churches now? 6 or 7?
Six churches. Steve's church does it twice.
And we'll defer now to Steve, whose Circle Church hosts 2 nights of the shelter. So, tell us how that's kind of impacted your feelings and abilities about being able to not only pursue a social justice agenda, but also really be able to help the homeless and disadvantaged, the working poor, in a really fundamental way.
Well, Joel mentioned way earlier in the program about the importance of forming community as well as doing political action and charity works. And that's what I think is really neat about the Faith Shelter program, is that there's right now the capacity is 18 people, and they form community together because they're there together every night. They eat supper together and they eat breakfast together. They spend time together during the day, and they work together so that all of them are able to maximize time to look for a job, time to look for housing, time to work out health issues and get to doctor's appointments and so forth. So there's a synergy that happens because they're together and because it's a small enough community. It's only 18 people, and they're carefully selected both based on that they're the most vulnerable and needy who really don't need to be sleeping on the ground for health reasons or age reasons or other things, but also because they're able to be community together. And some really remarkable things have happened out of that, and that's really pushed me in the direction of thinking about forming community and getting closer to getting to long-term solutions than just making myself feel good by feeding someone.
And it brings me to something that I really want to talk about. As part of the panel, I had wanted to invite Christopher Drury, who's with the Circle Church, and last winter, when people were talking about being so cold, unusually cold, and they wanted to develop warming centers and things like that, and there was a lot of people working on getting centers or buildings to open up to at least warm folks up in the middle of the night. Christopher at the Circle Church took it upon himself to create a program called Sunrise Hangout, which is now Tuesday, Thursdays, and Saturdays, where people can come in 4 o'clock in the morning and stay until 9 in the morning and warm themselves up. We have a video that I'd like to have queued up and show that Christopher now has a program called Holy Ground. And he speaks very eloquently and passionately about Holy Ground. I'd like to show that, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about that program with Steve. So if we can cue that video up, that would be terrific.
Hello, my name is Christopher Drury, and I'm the director of Holy Ground. We are a new inclusive faith-based community in Santa Cruz, and we're part of a network of small communities known as the Circle Church. Now, since our inception, we have made our pursuit of social justice a keystone characteristic of everything that we do at Holy Ground. Though we are still a new community, it is encouraging to see how much we've already accomplished in the realm of social justice. At Holy Ground, you will find people from every class, from homeless to wealthy, from college student and senior citizen, from all faiths and no faiths, liberals and conservatives, all sexes, all sexual orientations. All really means all. And we gather weekly to prepare and share a home-cooked meal and enjoy a sacred space and time together on Sunday nights. There is no sermon, just conversation about a passage of Scripture where everyone has an opinion that's valued. Now you may be asking, why a meal? How is something so simple considered to be social justice? And I believe there is something beautiful about breaking bread with another person, especially when that someone isn't like you. Sharing a meal expresses equality. And hunger breaks down the illusion of social class because we all get hungry. However, at Holy Ground, we do not simply serve meals to the homeless, and that is because we believe that a food line still tends to create those social barriers between privileged and those who are struggling financially. At Holy Ground, we eliminate the social barrier by preparing and enjoying a meal with those who are struggling as their equals. Both homeless and wealthy show up, they wash up, and they help prepare the food. After the service, we all stay and we help clean up, make sure everything's in order. And this seemingly small step in ministering with others as equals is a gigantic leap forward in the journey that I believe faith communities must make if we're to be a voice for social justice. We are both an open and affirming space for the LGBT community. In fact, one of our core leaders is a member of the LGBT community, and she is active in leading elements of our weekly liturgy. Social justice also comes with sharing at Holy Ground. We're in the early stages of sharing our resources. Members of Holy Ground have offered their own transportation, their tools, their books, their devices, their sweat equity to be used in community and common inventory of shared resources. This is still in the early stages, but already we are having tremendous results. We even have a gallery where you will see people coming and displaying their art and selling it for profit so they can create income for themselves, or they can donate their artwork for profits for the community if they so choose. We participate in the feedings and other services that are offered here at the Circle Church. One of our programs, pioneered by one of our core leaders, is known as Sunrise Hangout, and it is an early morning warming center on the west side. This ministry has grown, and we have plans to expand the hours and days of services that are offered by this much-needed ministry in Santa Cruz. We also have plans for future environmental cleanups, local fundraisers for other nonprofits in Santa Cruz, community gardening for the west side. I mean, the list goes on and on. And this is encouraging because we are still a new community. We're still pretty fresh, and already the fruit of social justice has begun to emerge from the foundation of our small gathering. Now, we gather in the fireside room of the Circle Church Sunday nights, 7 p.m., 8:30 p.m. for our sacred meal. We would like to invite the public to come and to witness this new community grow and take root in Santa Cruz. Now, for more information, you can email us at santacruzholyground@gmail.com and check us out on the web at holyground.net. Thank you so much, Santa Cruz, for both your time and consideration, and may you be blessed in all of your endeavors.
So that is our friend Christopher Drury, who is doing so much great work. You can tell by his words and his passion that he really is called to do this work, and I think that's wonderful. Steve, tell us more about Christopher and that work.
Well, I got acquainted with Christopher by telephone. It
And
was
mentioning
referred.
Trevor, of course.
And Trevor Stout and Cassandra Ferguson.
Okay.
The three of them were so excited about what we're doing at the Circle Church, and it's living out of what we've been calling the social gospel, that they moved. They all quit their jobs. They moved from Beaufort, South Carolina, 3,000 some miles to Santa Cruz, and they live in an RV in our parking lot in order to do this ministry. And Trevor, who's got this, Trevor Stout is Christopher's partner and a long-standing Christian, graduate of Bob Jones University, which if folks know that's very conservative theologically. But Trevor has a passion for caring for homeless people. That's what brought him out here. And he quickly heard about the need for a warming center, a place people could warm up, especially in the early hours of the morning when it's so cold. And while other folks were talking about bureaucracy and trying to get the city council to do something, Trevor just said, well, why don't we just do it? So we did. So we're open Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, the 3 mornings of the week that have a tea in them. From 4 a.m. to 9 a.m. You could get some hot breakfast, something hot to drink, read a newspaper. If you didn't get enough sleep, you could roll out your bag and sleep for a couple of hours. It's not a shelter, it's not all night. But Trevor is there with breakfast and conversation and start the day out smoothly and in peace. And it's a very peaceful experience. And then Sunday nights, the Holy Ground group, which the three of them lead, Christopher being sort of the lead pastor of that, is sort of an extension of the Circle Church and at the same time a sort of a new church plant as well. That's a very neat Sunday night thing. But the three of them just have this passion for living out what they actually discovered that Jesus said. And they couldn't find a way to do that on the East Coast, and so they came out here.
Where does this take place, Steve?
At the Circle Church.
At the Circle Church. The
Yes.
Holy Ground also
Both
meets
Sunrise
there.
Hangout and the Holy Ground meets at the Circle
Right,
Church. The Holy Ground is Sunday evening, it's a dinner worship service. So you have dinner and worship all at the same time. And the whole worship service happens around a plate full of food.
Yeah.
And there's no sermon, there's just conversation about these kind of
And
things.
we'll give Christopher and Trevor and those folks a shout out because they're certainly deserving. The Holy Ground is 7 o'clock to 8:30 on Sundays at the Circle Church. So any night except tonight, which is the reason Christopher could not join us. He actually said, well, I'll come over and do a few minutes, but I said, no, we're going to go right on, at 7 o'clock, and you do your ministry, and when you think you can maybe step away at some point when it's being able to be administered by other folks or ministered by the folks, we'll do another show and we'll bring him back, and have him sit down and really get his ideas about the progressive ministry that really is so much at the core, I think, of the Circle Church. It's so impressive. Darrell, your observations about, this kind of boots on the ground, let's do it now, let's not be involved with the bureaucracy or having to consult city council or city government. How can we separate those two things out and really do the good work without getting bogged down in bureaucracy?
Well, I think that's very important to take that kind of lead when, just as you put it, rather than waiting for somebody to go through who knows how many months or even years of deliberation. That's critical. I think the church has that opportunity to do that, and that's what's actually happening here, particularly at Circle Church, but also the ministry that Joel began through the faith communities as well. I think there's also another side to it, Steve, and that is that sometimes that offers to the church an excuse not to engage the corporate or secular political structures. And we cannot afford to slip into that track as well. Because it seems to me the gospel is a gospel to the whole world, not just to our little world, not just, Jesus didn't just minister to a few folks who were his. His was the kingdom of the world. God is the God of the whole world. And so the church is called, and often does not recognize, I think, its call to change the structures of the world. And that's much harder. We have to keep working at that. We have to keep reminding our people that that's part of the call. And if I believe, I'm not quite certain about this, but I believe that's one of the ministries that goes on at Robin Meyer's church in Oklahoma City. They do the homeless ministries, they do ministries of outreach of all kinds, but they also have a kind of political engagement ministry, which tries to prod the political structures into action. And we probably need to do more of that here.
And I'll hasten to add that we are not always in opposition. The faith communities are not always in opposition with local civic leadership. Don Lane, Catherine Byers have been members of the AFC. David Terrazas lives in your neighborhood, Steve. And so I think at least to make them aware that there are programs that are benefiting the community as they are mandated to do in their roles as civic leaders, that there are other people doing these good works, and there's something that they can do to help them rather than become any kind of an obstacle or hindrance. And I think to smooth the path to do this is sometimes difficult, but certainly worth the effort, as Joel well knows.
Yeah. Just a little story that inspires me. In Palo Alto, they started an outreach ministry with a shelter and a meal at the Episcopal Church in Palo Alto, St. Mark's. And it ran into opposition, and not dissimilar to what's happening here. This was years ago, and it's evolved over the years, so now it's not only a faith-based community effort, but it's also a county institution that runs a shelter and services much like the Homeless Service Center, but it's a cooperative venture with churches and the county. And the woman I know in that church shared with our church once that now the police will come every 2 months, 3 months, quarter, something like that, and they will serve food at the churches. And so that's just a nice reconciliation of people who were at odds.
And I know, Steve, you and I have had several conversations about the politics of faith-based social justice. And there is a political component to it. You, in your way, are very politically astute. And I think that has really aided your ministry in being able to do some of the things that you have been able to do and continue to offer those services.
Well, I thank you for saying that. I don't always feel that way. Sometimes I feel like
you're always splashing water against that rock.
Sometimes I feel like there's a cow pie in the pasture, I'll step in it, But I do think that Darrell is right, that we have to have the courage to step into the political arena when it's biblical and when it's true to the gospel. And the tricky part's to do that without getting co-opted into the political agendas of other organizations or other people. But I think that the platform for that is the boots on the ground ministry. For example, both I and Scott Galloway from Calvary Episcopal Church and a couple of other folks have been asked to serve on the Smart Solutions to Homeless Committee. Now some of us are on the Strategic Planning Committee for the Homeless Action Project, tasked with and working together with other people to try to develop a 10-year strategic plan for homelessness. We got a seat at that table because of what we're doing, but we do have to have the willingness to speak, even if it's not always comfortable at that table now that we've been invited to sit there.
Darrell, your observations about the political nature of faith-based social justice agendas?
Well, I think I indicated in part that there is. Well, let me step back and say that progressive Christians, progressive or liberal Christians, are those who, in my judgment, are very interested in changing the society and engaging in the political and social structures for change, but not interested in dominating them or controlling them. That is not true often of the more conservative religious groups of all kinds, which are much more interested in controlling and dominating, making the political structures their own. And we're not interested in that. We're interested in what is traditionally known as a separation of church and state, but carrying a definite moral influence into that political complex. So that's a distinction I think that's important. And it's important because some of the most powerful lobby groups in the country who want to control the political process are conservative groups. We're not interested in doing that. We're interested in cooperating and influencing, raising the questions, bringing the moral concerns to bear. So that is, I think, an important distinction. And and I'll throw that out
Yeah.
there where my colleagues may disagree with me on that.
Joel,
but-
your observations about that?
Well, maybe have a little different take. I certainly don't want to create a progressive Christian oligarchy that controls people's minds and their pocketbooks. I always love the quote by Muhammad in the Quran that says there is no coercion in true religion and coercive power.
Right.
But I also believe that there is two components to power, and the opposite is impotence. And sometimes I think we're afraid of power. And I think that in a society, pragmatically, power is related to people, how many people you have, and money. And so, you know, Jesus said the love of money is the root of all evil, but he didn't say money was the root of all evil. So, you know, the resources that we have, we need to use them in a holy and sacred way, not just for our own individual gain.
Steve, your thoughts?
Well, I think that the desire to control society usually ends up with churches getting co-opted by the status quo. That's why I'm leery of it. That's why I tend to take an attitude that we need to be the curmudgeons of society. We need to be the prophets speaking truth to power, and be very careful of getting co-opted into any political party or political agenda. Or nowadays, maybe we should say we need to be careful about getting co-opted into any television network, because those are the real political parties.
With the
let's face
exception
it.
of CTV.
With the exception of CTV, yeah. But so I think there's a need to be very careful about that, and a need to be able to speak to it from the perspective of the kingdom of God and from a different kind of world. But I also think Joel is not wrong in saying we need not to be afraid to be a powerful voice in our society. And
I was talking to some folks earlier before the guests arrived about the separation of church and state and that kind of thing constitutionally. And yet, something Darrell said struck me when you're talking about lobbying. And when, as Joel will recall, and Steve probably as well, when Don Lane was sworn in as mayor 2 or 3 years ago, he brought special attention to the AFC, their work, and so because he's talked about generally homelessness, you know, being able to help the disadvantaged, be able to help people in reduced circumstances. Said, now here is a group who is doing that. Here is a group who is substantively providing programs that the city should, in whatever way they can, support. And that's not supporting them through funding. It's not supporting them through anything but, you know, let's not make it more difficult for them to do their work. And so I think it's important to have
And
that.
I would like to say about that too. I think Don's leadership when he was mayor and when he made that speech is directly related to Steve and Scott being on the county commission for
Don being a member as well,
for homelessness. And you know, that just personally, when I heard that, it was like wind in my sails. You know, I could go back to the congregation and say, the mayor thinks we're doing a good job. You know, we're not at odds with everyone, and that kind of alliance was wonderful.
Well, and it's important for civic leaders to be able to look to leadership other than the things they can do themselves. And this was a case where he was actually, you know, singling out the AFC as leaders in this particular area, and I thought that was appropriate, and as Joel says, very motivating for all the membership. You know, we are getting winding down to the end of the show. I want to make sure that everybody is able to have a last observation about maybe the future of social justice and the faith communities. And Joel, give us your look into the crystal ball and tell us what the future of social justice and the faith communities is.
Well, I see the community of the AFC community growing with more involvement from more churches and more passionate involvement of the churches that are already involved. I think that there's one thing we didn't talk about, and that is the word coaching or advocacy. And Wings is a church in Scotts Valley, that
Covenant.
is coming alongside people in the 180 program as a coach, as an advocate to help them along the way.
Okay.
And they are wanting to be a part of the AFC with our guests in our community. And I think that kind of individual coming alongside a person, asking them what they would like to see happen in their life and helping to improve the quality of life individually, person by person, is going to be
And
very
maybe
significant.
we can get Jim Young back, Jim Young of Wings, and that would be terrific. Darrell, with just a couple of minutes, but 30 or 40 seconds of your crystal ball.
Let me just call attention to the fact that the coming Progressive Christian Forum is going to be dealing, I think, with precisely this issue, that is to how the churches, the corporate churches that we all represent, can be more effective in the community in this kind of outreach, both service and social action. And that event is going to happen the first or second week of February next year. So we would just simply let folks know that will be happening. Watch for the
All right,
news.
Steve, we got about 30 seconds. Please mention the September convocation that the AFC is hosting.
The Association of Faith Communities is hosting, help me out, a conference on September. I'm the keynote speaker. I should know what day it is.
I think it's the
5th, I think. It's Friday afternoon.
Yeah, we'll get everybody more information, we promise.
Yeah. I think there's a synergy and more of unity in Christianity than a lot of people realize, and more of a hunger in society for a progressive social gospel understanding of the teachings of Jesus. And I think that's where the future of Christianity lies. I'm not sure it's really going to involve the institutional churches that we all serve. I think there's a lot more grassroots, young people, house churches, ministry-driven groups that wouldn't typically be called an institutional church. They're going to drive the Christianity of the future, but they're going to drive it with a social gospel understanding of what the teachings of Jesus are really all about. And I'm excited about the 21st century in that sense.
I'm hopeful about that, too.
Well, good. I appreciate you joining us this evening. A fascinating topic, but one that everybody, I think, is passionate about. When you're talking about helping those less fortunate, people who in reduced circumstances, there's so much need. But yet there are people of goodwill like Joel and Darrell and Steve who are doing such tremendous work every day. Christopher Drury, we mentioned Trevor again, Paul Seaver, Mel Nunes. There are people out there who are doing this every single day. And I think that is their individual ministry. And I think, faith community and lay folks alike, should be able to, in solidarity, move forward with an agenda that really is going to serve those who need the most. So thank you again for being here. It's wonderful.
Thanks for the opportunity, Steve.
Joel, enjoy your trip to Sweden. We hope for a full report when you get back about
I'll give it to
the
you.
ministry and whether interestingly, I think one of the people who were talking on the Voices show was somebody from Scandinavia who was talking about homelessness there. So maybe you can give us a report when you come back about what kind of homelessness they have. But anyway, Joel Miller, Darrell Yeaney, Pastor Steve DeFields-Gambrel, thank you so much for being here. Thanks everybody for Charlie Phillips and Becky Phillips, Betsy Phillips, our producers. Everybody behind the cameras in the engineering room, thanks so much. This has been Steve Pleich for Voices from the Village, and we will see you next time. Thanks so much.